The night was colder than usual, and the city streets seemed quieter than they had in years. David, a man most people in the city knew only as the powerful CEO of a large corporation, walked aimlessly under the glow of street lamps that flickered every now and then. It wasn't like him to walk alone at night. Normally, his driver would be waiting, or his assistant would arrange for him to be whisked away from meetings and events with flawless precision. But that night, he told everyone to leave him alone. He didn't want the sound of engines, the chatter of colleagues, or the shallow conversations about profits and deals. His heart was restless, and his soul felt heavy with a weight he couldn't name. Despite his success, or maybe because of it, David was beginning to feel the emptiness of everything he had worked for. As he walked, he noticed something that made him stop. In the alleyway to his right, illuminated by the dim glow of a broken streetlight, he saw a figure bending over a trash bin. The movements were slow, deliberate, and desperate. At first, he thought it was just another faceless, homeless person, someone he'd grown used to ignoring in his luxury-driven life, but something about this scene caught him differently. Perhaps it was the way the person's hands trembled as they lifted scraps of food, or the quiet dignity with which they moved despite their circumstance. David stood still, unable to look away. When the figure turned, he saw her face. A woman, tired eyes, hair unkempt, clothes torn and dirty, but there was something about her expression, a mix of weariness and quiet strength, that unsettled him. He stepped closer, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing against the pavement. The woman looked up, startled, clutching a piece of stale bread like a child clutching a toy. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. She looked at him not with shame, but with a kind of guarded pride. He fumbled for words and instinctively reached for his wallet. That was always his first solution, money, to throw bills at problems until they went away. But before he could offer it, her voice broke through the silence. "I don't need your pity," she said, her tone soft but firm. "I just need to be seen." Those words pierced through him. He froze, the wallet still in his hand, suddenly feeling foolish. Here he was, a man who had everything, and yet he didn't know how to respond to the most basic plea of another human being. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for charity. She just wanted to be acknowledged. Slowly, he lowered the wallet, embarrassed at how blind he had been. He cleared his throat, finally managing to speak. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then answered, "Clara." She told him her story in fragments, each word heavy with the weight of lived pain. She had once been a teacher, passionate about shaping young minds, but life had dealt her blow after blow. Her husband had died suddenly in an accident, leaving her with debts she couldn't repay. Medical bills had swallowed what little she had left, and soon after, she lost her home. The world that once felt full of promise became a daily fight for survival. Yet, as she spoke, there was no bitterness in her voice, only a tired kind of acceptance, and a stubborn streak of hope that hadn't yet died. David found himself listening, really listening. For years, people spoke to him about investments, contracts, and deals. He nodded, agreed, and signed papers. But this was different. For the first time in years, he wasn't just hearing words. He was hearing a soul. He surprised himself by sharing something too. He admitted to Clara that despite his wealth, despite his power, he felt empty, that his days were filled with meetings and decisions, but his nights were filled with silence, that the mansion he lived in felt more like a prison than a home. People respected his position, yes, but nobody really saw him, not for who he was. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then spoke words that would stay with him forever. "You're searching in the wrong places. Joy isn't in what you own, it's in what you give." It was such a simple statement, but it landed like thunder in his heart. All his life he had been chasing numbers, collecting things, building an empire. But in doing so, he had lost sight of the simple truth she carried even in her brokenness. She had nothing, and yet she understood life more deeply than he ever had. They sat together that night, Two strangers from completely different worlds. One who had everything but felt empty, and one who had nothing but carried wisdom. When David finally rose to leave, he couldn't shake her words. He promised himself he would return the next day, and he did. The following evening he found her again, still in the alley, but this time he didn't come with his wallet. He came with food, hot soup, fresh bread, and coffee. Clara's eyes softened when she saw him, and for the first time she smiled faintly. They ate together on the curb, and for hours they spoke, about her life, about his, about the small things that people often forget to appreciate. She told him she still dreamed of teaching one day, still believed in kindness, still hoped she could stand on her own again. Her resilience humbled him. Days turned into weeks, and David kept returning. The more time he spent with Clara, the more he began to see life differently. He realized how blind he had been to the suffering around him, how detached he had become from humanity. One evening, as Clara wrapped herself tightly in an old blanket, shivering against the cold, David made a decision. "Come with me," he said softly, "not because I pity you, but because you reminded me of what life really means. Let me help you find your way back, and maybe you can help me find mine." Clara hesitated. She had been betrayed before, had heard promises that were never kept, but there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that told her he meant it. With a deep breath, she agreed. David arranged for a small apartment for her. Nothing extravagant, but warm, safe, and hers. He bought her clothes, arranged medical care, and most importantly, helped her apply for jobs. When she stood in front of children again at a community center that needed teachers, her eyes lit up in a way David had never seen. From the back of the room, he watched as she guided children with patience and love, and something inside him shifted. For years, he had measured success by profit margins and business expansions. But standing there, watching Clara do what she was born to do, he realized that true success was measured by the lives you touched. From that moment on, David began changing his own life. He started initiatives through his company to help the homeless, to create shelters, to fund education programs. At first, his board thought he was being reckless, turning their resources to causes that didn't promise profit. But slowly, they saw the change. The company's reputation grew, yes, but more importantly, lives were being changed, and all of it traced back to one night when a CEO stopped to listen to a homeless woman digging in the trash. Months later, Clara had rebuilt her life. She was teaching full-time, inspiring children not only with knowledge, but with her story of resilience. And David, once a man trapped by loneliness, found peace in giving. Every time he visited Clara's classroom and saw her smile as she guided young hearts, he felt gratitude. She had given him something no amount of money could buy, a purpose. Her words had indeed changed his heart forever. And so the story of David and Clara became something whispered about in the city, not as a fairy tale, not as a headline, but as a quiet reminder of what happens when kindness meets humanity. David realized that Clara had never needed saving. She had needed someone to believe in her. And in believing in her, he found himself saved. And now, if you're listening to this, let Clara's words reach you too. Joy isn't in what you own, it's in what you give. Let this story remind you that no matter how small, an act of kindness can change a life. Sometimes it can change too. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Everyday Grace Stories, because the world needs more reminders that kindness restores humanity, and compassion is the truest measure of success. The night was unusually silent, the kind of silence that makes a man think more deeply than he wants to. David, a CEO whose name carried weight in every business circle, was walking through the city after leaving an important dinner. His colleagues had left in their cars, laughter and small talk fading into the night, but David had chosen to walk. He told himself he needed fresh air, but the truth was he felt something missing, something hollow inside him that meetings and wealth couldn't fill. As he passed an alley, a sight pulled him out of his thoughts. A woman bent over a trash bin, searching desperately for scraps of food, her frail figure illuminated by the weak glow of a flickering streetlight. He froze. He had seen homelessness before, of course. Who in a city like this hadn't? But something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way she carried herself even in her desperation, not completely broken, not fully defeated, but clinging to some shred of dignity. He stepped closer, and she startled, clutching a half-eaten sandwich like a treasure. For a moment their eyes met, and he saw not just hunger in them, but a story untold. He did what came naturally to him, reached for his wallet. But before he could speak, she shook her head. Her voice was tired, cracked, but steady. "I don't need your pity. I just need to be seen." Those words lodged in his chest like a truth he had been running from his whole life. He lowered the wallet slowly, ashamed of how quickly he had assumed that money could fix everything. He asked her name, Clara. She whispered. And then, as if something inside her needed to be released, she began to tell her story. Clara had once been a teacher. She had lived in a small but warm home with her husband, surrounded by books and the joy of guiding children. But then came the accident that took her husband's life. Grief consumed her, and soon the medical bills followed. She tried to hold on, tried to keep her job, but the weight was too much. Slowly, everything she had built unraveled. The home was gone, the job lost, and soon she found herself with nothing but the clothes on her back and the streets as her shelter. Yet as she spoke, she wasn't bitter. She still spoke with a gentle strength, as though life hadn't managed to break the core of who she was. David listened, truly listened, and to his own surprise, found himself sharing something in return. He confessed that he was lonely, that his success came at the cost of his soul, that the empire he built was full of people who respected his title, but not his heart. The mansion he returned to each night echoed with emptiness, and though he had everything money could buy, he had no peace. Clara's tired eyes studied him carefully. Then she said something simple, yet powerful. "Sometimes all we need is a second chance, not just the poor, not just the broken, even the powerful, even you." Her words sank deep. That night he left shaken, and yet he couldn't stay away. The next evening he returned with warm food and coffee. Clara was there, surprised to see him, but she accepted his gesture. They ate together on the curb, and slowly a strange bond began to form. Night after night, he found himself seeking her out, listening to her stories and offering his own truths in return. She still dreamed of teaching, she said, still believed she could rebuild if given the chance. Her resilience humbled him. One night, as she shivered beneath her worn blanket, he made a decision. "Clara," he said softly, "come with me, not as charity, not because I think less of you, but because you've reminded me of what matters. Let me give you a second chance, and maybe you'll give me one too." Clara hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. She had heard promises before, empty words that led nowhere, but something in his voice carried honesty. After a long pause, she nodded. The days that followed changed both of their lives. David arranged for a modest apartment for Clara. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, and hers. He bought her clothes, ensured she had medical care, and helped her find her footing again. She cried the first night she slept in a real bed, whispering that she thought she had forgotten what safety felt like. But it wasn't just material comfort she received. It was dignity, the belief that she was worth saving. With his encouragement, Clara applied for a teaching position at a local community center. The day she walked into a classroom again, her spirit came alive. Standing before children, guiding them, nurturing them, she was home again. David watched from the back, his chest tightening as he saw the light return to her eyes. It wasn't just a job for her, it was her soul's purpose. And in helping her return to it, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. But the transformation didn't end with Clara. David began to change too. Seeing her rise from the depths of despair inspired him to look at his company differently. For years he had focused only on profit. Now, He began initiatives to give others second chances, programs for the homeless, shelters for those who had lost everything, training opportunities for those overlooked by society. His board resisted at first, arguing that these projects didn't generate revenue, but David was firm. Some returns, he told them, can't be measured in numbers. Slowly, the company became known not just for its success, but for its compassion. Clara flourished. Her students adored her, and parents praised her for teaching not just lessons, but kindness. Every time David visited her classroom, he saw the ripple of that second chance he had given her. It wasn't just her life that had changed. It was the lives of every child she touched, every family she inspired. And in her strength, he found his own second chance too. For in lifting her up, he discovered purpose beyond wealth and joy beyond possessions. Months passed, and Clara grew stronger, more confident. She was no longer the woman digging through trash for scraps. She was a teacher, a mentor, a symbol of resilience. And David was no longer the hollow man chasing numbers. He was a leader with heart, a man who finally understood that success meant little without humanity. Their connection had created a ripple touching lives far beyond their own. One act of kindness, one choice to give a second chance, had transformed not just one story, but many. David often thought back to that first night, the broken street lamp, the woman clutching stale bread, and the words she had spoken. "I just need to be seen." He realized that seeing someone, truly seeing them, was the beginning of every transformation, and in seeing Clara, he had finally seen himself. Their story spread quietly, not as a headline, but as an inspiration whispered among those who believed in hope. People began to talk about how second chances could rebuild lives, how kindness could reshape communities. David never sought recognition for what he had done. Clara never boasted about what she had survived. But together, they became living proof that compassion could rewrite even the most broken chapters. And so, the CEO who once measured his worth in profits now measured it in lives touched. And the woman who once searched through trash now stood at the front of a classroom, her voice steady, her spirit unbreakable. They had found each other in the darkest of nights, and through the gift of a second chance, both had been transformed. And now, as you listen to this story, let it remind you too, second chances can transform lives. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is to believe in someone when the world has forgotten them. And sometimes, in giving that gift, we find our own redemption. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Everyday Grace Stories. Because kindness is never wasted, and one act of compassion can create ripples that change the world.